Welcome to The Trend, where you'll get an enlightened perspective on trending news and topics with amazing commentary. I'm your host, RTL Faith. Welcome back to the podcast. Now, we don't have a guest for today's episode of the podcast. I was supposed to have a guest, didn't show up. It is what it is. The day moves forward, time moves on. So today is a solo podcast going back to the roots. Of course, nothing really changes for the most part. We got a lot of interesting topics that we're going to discuss, of course, do all the segments as always, and have a lot of fun doing it. And of course, if you guys don't know, this is live streamed on YouTube, Twitch, Trovo, Facebook. It is live streamed, The Trend with RTL Faith. You can visit the website as well, www.thetrenwithrtlfaith.com. Podcast is on its move. Rate us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Appreciate you. All right, and enough with the self-plugged. I know that's not what you want to hear. You want to hear the news. You want to hear my perspective. You want to hear some information, and I'm here to provide that for you. So, we got a lot of interesting topics, of course. We're going to be talking about Trump and his house getting raided, why it happened, and some of the different opinions and sides, of course. We're going to talk about Serena Williams officially retired from tennis. And yes, that's big. She's a world-renowned tennis player, one of the greats in terms of tennis, especially females tennis. But I also want to bring up something else. Is that one thing that she brought up in terms of tennis is how she felt that she retired early because she was a woman, and some things regarding that. And I want to talk about that, of course. We're going to discuss Jennette McCurdy, the co-star of iCarly. Some of the things she said. She released a book. I forget, why am I forgetting the name of the book? It is an ironic name of the book. We're going to talk about child abuse because that's the themes of the books, of course. And we're going to talk about Andrew Schultz and how he released a comedy special. What that represents. What is kind of the interpretation of comedy in today's society. My guest today was supposed to be a comedian, actually. And I was going to talk to him about this comedy stuff. So missed out on that. But I'm sure in future episodes, we're going to have comedians on. And we're going to have a lot of discussions regarding stuff like that, of course. So a lot of amazing topics, I know. But before we dive into those topics, we're going to be doing our positivity segment. Positivity segment, of course. In today's positivity segment, in regards to the market, the economic market. Now, apparently, there's some light at the end of the tunnel. They're saying the recession could be on its downtrend. They're saying that we could be maybe going out of the bear market and entering a bull market. That is some of the hints. So obviously there's some positive news for some people who invest, especially in crypto. Oh my gosh, crypto is different right now. So a little news for you, something to look forward to, something to pay attention to at the very least. All right, let's dive right into the topics, of course. We're going to have our normal segments as well. I'll just be answering in behalf of the questions, of course. The OMU, PC, or C, or Contra segment, of course. Let's dive into it. First things first, I want to talk about the Donald Trump stuff, right? And that's fresh in my mind. So I did some research, obviously. If you guys don't know, one of Donald Trump's places he owns was raided by the FBI. And obviously there's a lot of heat. A lot of people on the Democrat side said, good for you. And a lot of people on the Republican side says, this is completely against our rights. This is a shame. The FBI should be disbanded. I saw Candace Owens tweet that about the FBI needing to be disbanded. And I'm like, I saw that. And the first thing I thought about is that is hypocritical. I am fair. If someone makes a logical argument, I will hear them out, agree with them. But the moment someone backtracks in favor of an ideology, then I'll call you out for it. Because you're probably Candace Owens. I know for a fact you would support cops, even with all the stuff that happened with George Floyd and a lot of these other situations, and you would be anti against disbanding the police force. But the moment something happens to someone that is on your side, you want to disband the FBI. That seems a little bit hypocritical if I'm being honest, right? Saying you want to disband the FBI. Now, a little different situation, of course, considering this was so important in terms of the political scene, but the premise still stands, and it's a hypocritical statement regardless, if I'm being honest. Now, you guys want to know what happened? Well, apparently there have been some investigations in regards to Donald Trump. And the investigations that's been going on is in regards to Donald Trump apparently taking classified documents from the White House to his location in Florida, I believe. If it's not Florida, regardless, he had some like vacation home. He took some important White House documents to these locations. So based on that, they were able to get a warrant from the court. Although it's kind of weird because a lot of representatives from the White House said they didn't know about it, but if he took classified documents, wouldn't you want to own up to that, saying, okay, that's why we raided his home? Regardless, they got approval from the court justice judge. They got their warrant. Someone tipped them off about him doing this. They've been investigating it since April, is what the reports are saying. And they raided his home, went through everything. And apparently Donald Trump, they said they even cracked open his safe. Now, whether or not they found documents apparently hasn't been reported yet. I'm sure if they did not find documents, that's going to be very telling. But obviously this is going to have a lot of outrage because we got to find out whether or not this was legit or not. Was this search legit from the FBI? Was this search legit from the person who told them to do it? Because obviously a lot of Republicans are saying this is a political move as they try to make Donald Trump be, they want to criminalize him. They want to put him in jail. They want to do a lot of things in regards to Donald Trump. And obviously a lot of it stems from January 6th. And you're also kind of dwindling the Republican power if the Republican representative, the last one in terms of presidency, is a criminal, right? So there's a lot of chess moves in terms of politics. So the question at this point is, was it a legit search? And the other question is, did Donald Trump actually have these classified documents? Now people are saying, oh, these documents are super important. Like this could be a lot of people, families could be in trouble if people get their hand on the documents, etc., etc. And that's true, but it seems like a political answer is like, oh, classified documents, oh, our lives in danger if people get a hold of it, which could be true. It could be like secret codes, it could be nuke codes or whatever. It could be, right? It could be. So now it's left in the air. It's left in this sphere of hypotheticals on whether or not he actually did what they're claiming that he did. Now, I have no idea if Donald Trump did it, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's Donald Trump. He's one of the more unconventional presidents and representatives we've had, period. And there's a reason why the Democrats and a lot of politicians want to criminalize him. Because he set a precedent in terms of representative where he wasn't really held down based on other factions to have them do what they want him to do, because he was already an established billionaire. So obviously that kind of ruins the status quo and flow of things for America. So I understand why people want to criminalize him, and a lot of people don't like him. Like, factually, I know so many people do not like Donald Trump. It is what it is. I'm very curious. I'm sure we're not going to find out what those documents are, obviously, because if we did, they're classified, it wouldn't make sense, right? What's the point of the entire thing if we find out what the documents are? Very interesting. So we'll find out whether or not he had them sooner or later, and if they did find documents, then he will go to jail. Like, that is established. This is in violation of one of the important acts, of course. Donald Trump will go to jail. We'll see what the aftermath is. It's very interesting to see a lot of these Republican representatives and Republican individuals support Donald Trump in this situation. A lot of them said this is an unwarranted search. You had no evidence. And from everything that has been said, there's an ongoing investigation. But to be fair, there has been no evidence to support this. We don't even know who told the FBI to do it in the first place. So, a lot of shady things. At the end of the day, from outside looking in, we'll kind of see the aftermath sooner rather than later, of course. So, yeah, that's the thing regarding the Donald Trump situation. Before we kind of dive into the next topic of discussion, I want to do our first segment, OMU. If you don't know what it is, it's overrated, middle, or just right, and underrated. 5 topics, and I'm going to kind of give my personal opinion about it. First thing was dirty comedy. So that dirty comedy is basically comedy that can be basically have no limits. You know, you can make a racist joke, you can make a sexist joke, you can do whatever for the most part, and it kind of just gives you free realm to kind of explore everything. And honestly, I think it's underrated. The reason why I say that is because nowadays, like normal, if we go back a couple years, maybe you could argue that, A, it was just right. But nowadays, because of woke culture, because everybody wants to cancel everybody, everybody wants to limit what you say and limit how you say things, I feel like dirty comedy is taking a step back. Now, this goes hand in hand with the Andrew Schultz stuff we're going to talk about a little bit later, but regardless, in terms of comedy, in terms of jokes, I think for the most part, all is fair for the most part. You know, if you get offended, then you get offended, but trying to cancel someone from telling a joke is another thing. Now, sure, there's some nuance, and that's when it kind of gets tough when it comes to context. Are people just using jokes as a means to just be awful people? You could definitely make that argument, but when it comes to the most popular comedians, and at the end of the day, like a Dave Chappelle, like an Andrew Schultz, like a Kevin Hart, like a Cat Williams, like a Bill Burr. Regardless, you know who I'm talking about. Those comedians are very, very successful. We don't want to cancel them. They're not horrible people. They just tell jokes and they tell it how it is, what you want when it comes to comedy. So I'm very much in support of that, of course. Next is Dave Chappelle. Speaking of Dave Chappelle, honestly, just right. I think a lot of people consider him the greatest comedian of all time, if not at least like top 5 or top 10. Now, personally, if I'm being completely honest, I have never really watched Dave Chappelle. When I started getting into like comedy and watching comedy specials and stuff like that, I started out with like Kevin Hart, and Kevin Hart was extremely funny. I even watched, yes, I know I'm gonna get clowned for it, Jeff Dunham for the puppets and stuff, but I stayed by it being pretty entertaining. So I got into the comedy scene a little bit late. Of course, this Key and Peele, of course, with their skits. And Dave Chappelle, a lot of the things he talks about later on in life is very eye-opening. And again, we're going to talk about it a little bit later. History. History is underrated. And that's tough to say because I feel like people live in the past so much. I feel like people live in the past too much. But I think that mostly dwells from like slavery, where people just bring up slavery as much as humanly possible. People bring up, you know, being oppressed as much as humanly possible. Now, I do like when I learn new historical information, even if it references slavery, as long as it's new information, not rehashed BS, then, I mean, it's not BS, but not rehashed information just so you can be oppressed, then I'm all in. I'm willing to listen, because my thing when it comes to history is learning new bits of history. I don't want to learn the same thing over and over again, and it's used more like a tool to act like you're oppressed. Now, I do think there's so much more history out there, and of course, because we live in America, regardless where you live, actually, history is always going to be put through a lens based on the victor. So you won't get the full context unless someone actually tries to explore and get different perspectives. So that's one of the good things about history and some historians, is they're willing to find that different perspective in the first place. Now, so with that said, I do think history is underrated. I think there's so much to learn from history. I mean, there's so much knowledge back in history that could be eye-opening, such as, of course, we know, like the library. I don't know why I'm blanking on the library. that one infamous library, a lot of the pyramids, a lot of the information. So a lot of things in history can be very, very eye opening in terms of how society and how humanity should progress going forward. But when it comes to rehashed slavery stuff, it's like, okay, whatever. Tell me something new. Moving on. Finding the meaning of life. I think, for me personally, okay, this is gonna be maybe unpopular opinion. For me personally, in terms of finding the meaning of life, I think it's somewhat overrated. Now, the reason why I say that is not because I don't want to know the meaning of life, but more so because I think people try too hard to find the meaning of life. You understand where I'm coming from? I think for the most part, when it comes to finding the meaning of life, that is something that will eventually happen when you die. It's either there's something after you die or there's nothing after you die. But then, regardless, you'll find the answer. I think that people are so kind of stuck on trying to find the meaning of life in current living scenarios that they're blinded to what life has to offer right in front of you. Whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's the numerous countries and continents and states and cities and providences. I feel like people are so distracted by trying to find the meaning that they're not living life itself. You feel me? Yes, you do. Appreciate you. And last but not least, the royal family. The guy that I was going to interview was actually British. So I was curious if he was going to even answer this question. I know nothing about the royal family, so I'll say just right, middle, whatever. It is what it is. So that is the OMU segment. So we're going to move on to the next topic, and that's the Andrew Schultz comedy special. If you guys didn't know, Andrew Schultz, a very, I don't know if he was always popular, but he's definitely blown up as of recently, especially this year, comedian. So what happened, right? He was supposed to have a special on a network, but because of, current PC culture, the network told him, hey, I need you to cut out these, this, and that, because, people will get offended, and that'll be bad for ratings. And Andrew Schultz was basically like, I don't care. He straight up was like, I do not care about people getting upset of my special. That simple. Andrew Schultz stood up, slapped him in the face, and walked the other direction. So he bought his special back from that network. Apparently it was like over $1 million. He ran his own special, funded it and everything, and it was successful. He made triple from what he bought the special for from that network. Really got to give him a round of applause because of it. And the real eye-opening thing in regards to the situation is the fact that people still want natural comedy. Sure, there's the wokies out there that want to cancel you for everything if it offends them even in the slightest. But what Andrew Schultz proved with this comedy special is he proved the fact that people want to be not normal is not the right word, but people want natural. That is the perfect word. Natural, unfiltered, uncensored comedy. It definitely seems like people are also tired of the cancel culture. Matter of fact, this comedy special, you had to pay $15 to watch it. So instead of being part of Netflix, for example, and watching it there with your subscription, you had to pay an extra $15 out of your pocket, and they did, and he made his money back. Now, I'm going to reiterate, I'm one of those people who think that comedy should be just left alone. Comedy is comedy. It's a outlet. It's the only realistic outlet that people have to say their truth. I think in terms of genres, how there's a bunch of different genres such as action, horror, regardless, whatever, romance. The one genre that truly brings people together, no matter who you are, is comedy. Now, sure, you may find one joke not funny, and comedy is completely subjective, but you could be completely different in terms of ideologies. You could be some white dude redneck that came from the middle of West Virginia, and then you got another guy who came from the back streets of Detroit growing up in a gang, and you can both find the same joke funny. Beauty of comedy. Beauty of comedy. So yeah, I'm a big advocate with comedy. I'm very impressed that Andrew Schultz was able to pull this off, and I do think this is a not only an eye opener but a door opener in terms of other comedians as they come out of the space. Now, Dave Chappelle is another one in terms of comedy where he really showed what he's all about, because he was also people were trying to cancel him because of the transgender jokes he was making, and people even wanted to kick his special off, kick him off of Netflix. And Netflix actually stood their ground and was like, nah, if you don't like the jokes, if you do not like Dave Chappelle, you can get the fuck out. They basically say, deal with it or quit. Deal with it or quit. So you gotta be respect. I do think comedy is really getting its center back in terms of the jokes being told now. Sure, it's obviously not just because you go like, oh, it's just a joke. It doesn't really give you an excuse to say whatever you want, unless you're really just like a comedian. But you have to be an established comedian to get that kind of card. It's a card. It's called the comedian card, where I can say whatever I want. You can't get offended. Not everybody has that card at the end of the day. And you can kind of tell when people are just using jokes as a means to be offensive. And that's a completely different story. So we're going to move on to the next topic, and we're going to move on to the next segment. PC or C, politically correct or canceled. If you guys do not know the segment, it's basically a question that's going to be asked. Now, obviously, I don't have a guest, so I'm going to be answering the question myself. But I can give either the politically correct answer, the one that won't get me canceled, or I'm going to give the cancelable answer. Or completely up to you to kind of interpret what the answer is in terms of those two situations, those two choices. So the question I was going to ask my guest is, should the homeless and poor be given free housing? Now, this is a very interesting question for me. I actually have no idea how I truly feel about this question. Now, sometimes that can be very apathetic in terms of like what people are going through and what their situation is, right? And, that's just me personally. But I also try to look at things at a very wide lens when I'm looking at, very difficult scenarios and situations. And living in America, I really have to go through the American perspective. I can't really talk about other countries. But living in America, the thing is when you start giving people free stuff, it never truly ends well majority of the time. Now, there are some people who really take the charity that is given to them and really make something out of themselves. But a lot of times I've seen, whether it's on television or personal experience or through secondhand sources or thirdhand sources, I hear or see it really, the person not improving their situation, and a lot of times taking advantage of the charity that they were given, taking advantage of that exact situation. So if we gave the homeless and the poor free housing, would it truly benefit society as a whole? One thing I will say, though, is that when it comes down to housing and infrastructure and architecture, especially currently in the real estate market, it will be a more difficult question if we were tight on houses and buildings. But in reality, there are so many homes and buildings and land that is just unoccupied. And that's when things get a little bit difficult, because that's when things get a little bit more eye-opening, because a lot of these very, very rich individuals are buying up these buildings, buying up these homes, and rising up the prices to stuff their pocket. So looking at those situations, even though I'm not a fan of taking the rich's money and just giving it to people, because that's not fair to them, but also with all the extra land and situations, why can't we have a location or something for people to live in? Why can't we have any of those situations and scenarios? So I'm not saying it's mandatory. I'm not saying, we need to have one for each city and state and all that stuff. But I do think the solution is, at the very least, should be discussed, especially with all this open area and free homes that could be used for something. That's just me. That's my personal answer regarding that. All right, so let's move on to our next topic for the podcast, of course. And we're going to be talking about the Serena Williams retirement, of course. If you guys didn't know, you should know who Serena Williams is. Serena Williams is a famous tennis player, one of the most dominant athletes, one of the most dominant tennis players, especially for the female division in history, period. And she's retiring around the age of 41, 42. And obviously, it's a big news. She's one of the greats in terms of sports, period. But one thing I want to point out is one of the things that she said at her retirement. Obviously, she praised a lot of athletes. She talked about her career a little bit. One thing she brought up in terms of her interview and her statement is in regards to her compared to other male tennis players, right? So she brought up the idea that she's only retiring because she's female. She also brought up the idea is that it's because I'm in a situation where I can't really work and take care of the home at the same time, whereas men don't have that responsibility, and male tennis players don't have the responsibility, that it's kind of unfair, it's sexist or whatever, because I'm in this situation, right? She's in the situation where she thinks male tennis players don't have to deal with that. They can just have their wives kind of take care of the home, and because she's female, she has to take care of her home. Very interesting perspective. And she may be right in terms of majority, if not all, male tennis players have a wife at home taking care of everything. That she may be right about that specific situation. But I looked up the person she was married to. And, ooh, what's up, Broku? I'm going to read that in a second. I looked up the person she's married to. She's married to a very successful individual, a very successful man. And that man owns businesses. Very successful, very rich businessman. So my thing is, if you wanted someone who's married to take care of the kids and be at home and all that stuff, why did you marry a busy man? And a lot of traditional marriages and a lot of traditional couples, a lot of men tend to marry someone who has the ability to stay at home, has the ability to be with the kids. They're not really looking for another successful individual in traditional relationships. So if you wanted the same type of situation where you can live your career, be successful, you make a lot of money, you're Serena Williams. If you wanted the same thing, why didn't you just marry a man to stay at home? There are dudes that live that way. There are actual dudes. And even if you're one of those women who needs a super attractive man, you can find one. Very attractive man who will live at home, stay at home, and take care of the kids. He could be masculine, it could be feminine, doesn't really matter. Regardless, he could have that option. That situation where you're like, oh yeah, I'm retiring because I'm female and I have to take care of the home. You could have married a man that did those responsibilities. You're Serena Williams. You have plenty to choose from in terms of men. So that's why I'm like, that doesn't really make sense to me. It seems kind of backwards. If you wanted to be just like those male tennis players, you marry a similar type of individual to take care of the home and stay at home. Now, sure, when you're pregnant or whatever, that's just biology. What are you going to complain about? You're going to complain to God about that? You're going to complain to science about that? What are you complaining about that for? There's nothing men can do to solve that situation. But if you're talking about you retiring early because you feel like you have to take care of the kids, that's your fault. I can't feel bad for you that you married a man who's super busy. You should have just married a man to stay at home and take care of the kids. And that's your choice. That's your decision. That's why I'm like, I can't be empathetic. I can't really understand that take. It's not really a sexist thing. What do you want what do you want sports society to do for you in terms of that situation? I don't understand what the point is with that. But give me one second. I'm gonna read what Boku said. He said, "I've seen studies that show tiny home communities are more cost effective than cleaning after homeless / imprisoning them, and then having a tiny home gave most of them a chance to get on their feet." Ooh, that is very interesting. I do think there's some value with that, then. Obviously, the question is who's going to pay for that? The government. Where is the money going to come from? Taxes, obviously. We know all that, obviously. Which could be very fair. I mean, they need to use their money productively in the first place. And with the rich buying up all these homes, I do think they could have like a tiny home for these individuals, like imprisoning them and leaving them out homeless definitely doesn't seem like a long-term solution for a lot of the homeless. I mean, I've been to so many areas like Washington, D.C. and Atlanta where it's like filled with homeless people. And I'm like, not only is this not okay for the individuals, but is it even safe? Right? Little story. So when I was back in college, one of my other colleges, we went to Atlanta for like a tournament event situation. We were walking through the streets of Atlanta, a lot of homeless people and all that stuff. And not gonna lie, this dude walked up to me, asked me for like $1. I was like, no. And he asked me for a quarter. And I gave him a quarter. And then my friend, he was like, yeah, Riddell, don't do that. He's like, what's up? He's like, hey, you don't know what that guy might do. He's like, fair enough. So that was a dumb move on my end. And the reason why I say that and say the story is it could be dangerous to have all these homeless people on the streets, on this general streets. And if you're not with a crowd, if you're an individual by yourself, it could get very potentially dangerous for you as an individual. So there's more than one solution and more than one reasoning on why this tiny home situation would be very effective, why these locations could be very effective, of course. So go back to the Serena Williams situation, kind of like reiterating that fact. So regardless, my point is all right. So yeah, that's my thing in terms of the Serena Williams situation. Again, it just doesn't make sense, her point of view. And that you can really stem that from the idea that a lot of like women do not want to marry or get in a relationship with people or with men lower than themselves. That's definitely a common theme for a lot of individuals. There's been a lot of examples like men, they'll either marry someone on their level. Men, for the most part, if you kind of give a general pool of, you know, people they would date or marry, the scope is wider. They don't care if you're on the same level. They don't care if you're above. They don't care if you're below. They just want a good woman. Whereas women definitely have a higher standard. They need to either be at my level or above. Very few, it's a very small percentage of women that will date or marry a man that has less value than them personally. So that's why it's a very interesting statement that Serena Williams made that I completely disagree with. Broku. So if you guys don't know, I'm live streaming this podcast episode. So if I'm reading something, I'm gonna read it out loud, of course, if I'm like making an interesting point. And this is my guy here. He said the tax money saved on sending them to prison would foot the bill for most. It also boosts the economy by allowing them to get jobs. That sounds beneficial. My only thing is it puts too much, what's the word? Hope that these individuals will actually be productive and get jobs. Now, I am all for making more jobs if we can in those situations. And I do think there are people who are actually homeless that would work and try to get money and try to not just, do drugs and be violent and all that stuff. There's definitely a percentage, either I don't know what percentage of homeless, but even if it's half, that's still a big number, right? So potential benefits, potential solutions, right, with the tiny home situation. But again, the rich 1% are the ones who owns all those buildings and homes. So it's dicey. How are we gonna get that from them? We can't unless the government takes it from them. Well, the government won't because it's illegal. It's dicey. It is dicey. A lot of open homes that are there for nothing. A lot of open homes. All right, so we're gonna go into our last segment, contra segment. It's kind of like a this or that type of situation and scenario. First one is cultural diverse. Would you rather have a cultural diverse society with no national identity or a utopian society with a national identity? Now, this one's interesting. I personally would pick I think a utopian society, even though I don't believe in utopias, with a national identity is more valuable. I think one of the big issues for like America, for example, is it has no national identity. Sure, people identify as American, but most people do not, and most people hate America, which causes all this friction and anarchy, and the only ones who are really benefiting is the 1% who are pocketing from emotion. Let's keep it a buck. Next one is Republican or Democrat. I'm actually neither. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. I think both of them have hit very weird situations. This is hard because you kind of have to be this or that, but I wasn't meant to answer these questions. My guest was, so I'm gonna say neither. A mansion or a one-bedroom condo. One-bedroom condo. I don't like big homes, big spaces. It's not my thing personally. And then mask or anti-mask. I'd probably wear a mask if I had a choice, because like if we do hit a situation where it's very nasty, I'd rather be protected than not protected. That's just me. You know what I'm saying? You can breathe with a mask. If you can't breathe without a mask, then you need to go work out. I'm just saying how it is. All right, let's enter into our final topic of today, and that's in regards to Jennette McCurdy. If you guys don't know who that is, well, I don't know why you wouldn't. Former co-star of iCarly. If you guys didn't know, the iCarly reboot came back, and she's not a part of it for good reason. Now, she dropped a book talking about her life and her experiences on iCarly and with Nickelodeon, and it was very eye-opening. She talked a lot about her her abuse from her mother, who is now deceased, and it really tells the life of a child actor is not all flowers, rainbows, and benefits and all this good stuff. And it's very eye-opening too, with a lot of current child stars that are getting bullied by these random people on like social media just for living the way they want to live. It's very weird, very weird. She talked about how her mother would do stuff like constantly weigh her to make sure she was at a certain weight, and constantly make sure she ate a certain amount of calories so she didn't get too fat or anything like that. She also said that when she would take her measurements like every day, like every morning, every night, to make sure she looked a certain way. It was ridiculous. Like I'm sure the book that she released, which is why she's kind of in the news today, gives more knowledge, feedback, and perspective in terms of what she's been through for her personally. But again, it's very eye-opening in terms of how a child actor had to live her life for the most part. And my thing in terms of like child actors is it's really tough. I've also saw an interview where she actually had no control of her money when she was a child actor. Her mother had control of all the money, and apparently there's a fund where she had to wait until she's a certain age to actually take control of that money. But since her mother controlled it, she kind of did whatever she wanted with the money. She didn't really care. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the Britney Spears situation, where she didn't have control of her life, her finances, or any of that until she was in her 30s or 40s. I don't even know how old Britney Spears is. So it tells you how corrupt parents can be in terms of child actors. And just because they're the parents does not mean they know best. Now, what is the solution for that? I'm not really sure. It could be a situation where you go like, hey, there should be a society, or there should be a set amount of agents that are here for the child actors, that are an unbiased resource for them. But then if you go into the politics, a lot of these individuals can also be very corrupt at the end of the day, which again doesn't help the solution. Should it be a situation where the child actors, or I don't know what the solution is for child actors, because when it comes to Hollywood in general, you can say it's pretty darn messed up. And there's a lot of allegations, for example, for like Dan Schneider, in terms of like him doing a lot of weird stuff when it comes to kids and his actors. Allegedly, it's potentially a big creep. And there's other actors. If you guys remember, what's his name? He's old school actor. He's like the main actor on The Mummy. I saw this. He actually got blacklisted because for years, lost like a lot of money, became very overweight and depressed, and apparently there was a situation where he was SA, you know what I'm saying, sexually assaulted by like a director, and he got very depressed because of it and blacklisted because of the situation as well. If you don't know what blacklisted is, when a bunch of directors are like, and corporations go like, I don't want this actor part of my movies, part of my ads, part of my commercials, part of my TV shows, and the actor or actress can't get a job. So there's a lot of weird corruption, and obviously with the Jeffrey Epstein stuff with Pedophile Island, it's like a lot of actors are part of that too. It's like Hollywood is a messed up place, and there's a lot of conspiracies in terms of like their secret organizations of people who go to up and coming stars and make them famous but they have to sacrifice their whole being basically to the cause. Like, it gets kind of crazy. So if you're going in the route in terms of acting, definitely be on your P's and Q's. And if there's like an organization that's like, oh yeah, this is the quick way to money and fame and all that stuff, I'll think twice about it. It's, at the end of the day, when it comes to fame and fortune, you definitely have to have a good support group. You gotta have the good people around you that will always be there for you and not the fame. And that's hard to find. That is hard to find. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Of course, like I said, if you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, rate it 5 stars. Spotify, rate it 5 stars. And of course, you can visit the website www.thetrendwithrtlfaith.com. Hope you guys enjoyed listening. Of course, y'all have a good one. Take care and peace.